All 32 NFL head coaches are getting ready to send their teams through or wrapping up their mandatory mini camps, all in preparation for training camps coming up. But for some of these coaches, Wig, if they don't perform in 2024, this could be their last training camp running an NFL franchise. That and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Friday episode of Locked On NFL, your daily podcast covering the National Football League, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Don't forget that you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. And thank you so much for making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day every single day. I'm David Harrison. He's Tony Wiggins. Both of us are on Twitter. I'm at DHarrison82. He is at Talk Shopping Wig. Make sure you follow both of us. We're both credentialed member of the media covering our respective teams. He's covering the Jaguars. I'm covering the Washington Commanders. We've been doing this for a very long time, and we thank you for joining us on today's episode. Locked On NFL is here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers and everydayers. You know that we love you. We know we appreciate you coming through like you always do. On today's episode, Anthony Richardson has got some injury concerns creeping up, but should you really be concerned about them? And then we're looking at some quarterbacks who may be on the short list of names that might get replaced next year by some of the rookies coming out, like some quarterbacks got replaced this year by some rookies coming in. And we're going to start this episode off, Wig, talking about coaches that are on the potential hot seat. I'm going to kick it off here, and I'm going to lay off the NFC East. And if everydayers will know, for about the last 3 or 4 weeks, I've been going heavy on some NFC East teams. The Dallas Cowboys, New York Giants getting it the most. But I'm going to switch it over to the NFC South, where I do cover a team in the NFC South, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, for Sports Illustrated. But I don't go in on NFC South teams near as much as I do the NFC East. So I'm going to talk about Dennis Allen of the New Orleans Saints. Now, the New Orleans Saints, everybody always talks about salary cap this, salary cap that. Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints actually recently did an episode talking about how the salary cap issue is not as big an issue as everybody in the national media and on the outside really likes to make it. But the issues that are keeping the Saints from returning to Super Bowl contendership form, NFC South dominance form when they once won 4 straight NFC South division titles, is more than the salary cap. It's decision-making. There's some coaching things. There's some roster things. It's always a good time to hear Ross talk about the Saints. So you can go catch that episode if you want to get the full breakdown. But Wig, the bottom line for me is this. If you can't blame the money, and nobody can ever blame the injuries, then you got to blame the decisions. And when the decisions are to blame, you're either talking about a GM or a head coach or a group in tandem. And if it's one or the other, who's always the first guy to go? It's always the head coach. The GM rarely is the guy fired first, unless you're talking about a head coach that is basically your pseudo GM. And then he's like, no, is that guy's fault for contract negotiations? Let me get a new assistant GM basically in here. And that's not the situation in New Orleans. So I think that even though a lot of people are looking at the NFC South and saying the Atlanta Falcons are probably the favorites, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are the defending champions, the Carolina Panthers are on the outside looking in. Even though a lot of people expect the Saints to finish in third place, if they actually finish in third place, Wig, I think DA could be out of a job this time next season.
Could be out of a job. And I totally agree with you that most coaches most GMs get two coaches, right? So he hasn't really had his second coach yet because Sean Payton left. Okay, I don't think he got fired. I think Sean Payton just took some time off. But Mickey Loomis is a 37-year vet of the NFL. He's been in his current position for 22 years. Mickey Loomis has won a championship, and he's beloved. So it'll be very, very hard for people to say, well, Mickey Loomis has to go because he's a beloved figure in New Orleans because of the winning that title and bringing that team back after Hurricane Katrina and all of that stuff. So for me, it comes down to quarterback play. And we've seen it over and over again a lot. Every team can't be as fortunate as, say, Denver or Pittsburgh. And now, as we have seen over the last 38 years, Green Bay, nobody can be that fortunate to always have a guy in place. And this was before teams really, really started to do what those teams that I mentioned have done, although Green Bay's kind of done it forever in Pittsburgh too. But the main reason is it is hard to replace a franchise quarterback. It is really hard to replace an icon in that city and someone that is that beloved. So a lot of teams have struggled with it. Washington, the franchise you cover, struggled with it forever.
Oh, yeah.
And they won 3 Super Bowls with different quarterbacks. And then all of a sudden, for the last 30 years, it seems like it's just a revolving door. So it's not an enviable situation to be in. But at the end of the day, fans that buy tickets don't care. A lot of GMs have failed. Dave Caldwell failed here in Jacksonville because he hitched everything to Blake Bortles. And his entire tenure here, if you look at the quarterbacks that were available, the best of them all was Russell Wilson. So, of course, at the end, there was Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes, but they had already committed to Bortles. So getting that quarterback is more and more difficult. I think Arizona has kind of set the tone that you can move on from a guy you drafted in the first round and get another guy if you think he's better. There have been a couple of teams that have done that. The main thing is Dennis Allen hasn't been able to find a quarterback that is a good replacement or an adequate replacement and somebody that they actually trust, because I think Jameis Winston can play. I just think he wasn't really given a big enough opportunity there. But they had some other warts. So while I agree with Ross that even if their salary cap situation was better, they haven't had the leadership at the quarterback position that will allow them to get into the playoffs. However, I will tell Ross, those dudes are always in the salary cap mess down there. Now, they're good at figuring out. They are the James and Florida Evans of salary cap. They look like we ain't going to make it. And all of a sudden, James goes to the pool hall and he hits a pool cue and he gets enough money to go to Borgen's Market and buy some bad roast beef. If y'all don't miss my good time reference, you got to understand where I'm coming from here. So Ross can sit there and say this, just say the salary cap ain't real, but don't sit here and act like the most irresponsible team on earth when it comes to budgeting those books. But they figure out how to get it done, man. So I do think it's the quarterback issue. And for me, I think the Saints are going to end up having a lot of regrets because they've let people out of that building. Ryan Nielsen is probably the dude that should have ended up. And I hope they don't necessarily fire Dennis Allen and then come down here and get the Jaguars defensive coordinator after one season. But it's somebody like that I believe. I just don't believe in Dennis Allen. This is his second trip as a head coach, and he's kind of becoming the Norv Turner of today, where you're a very good assistant, but you're just not cut to be a head man. Yeah.
No, I agree. Absolutely. So the Saints are on the hot seat, or DA specifically is on the hot seat. Wig, what other coach do you think is on the hot seat this NFL season?
We're going to go quick. McCarthy in Dallas. We're going to go quick. You said you had to stay away from the NFC East. I don't. He is on the hot seat. He is on the hot seat. In fact, he might already be fired and doesn't even know it yet, knowing Jerry Jones, because they're going to, I think this is Dak's last year there. They're going to try to probably start over a little bit, and Jerry's going to make a splash hire and try to hire somebody like Lincoln Riley or whoever the hot guy is. He's going to try to chase him. Maybe he'll try to go get Kirby Smart because that's the kind of stuff he does. But for me, Mike McCarthy, I just don't think this is going to work out for him. They haven't spent any money in the offseason. They haven't gotten any better, and their draft was just blah. So to me, it's the Cowboys. They're back in the news, even if they might not want to be, but I think they do want to be. I think Dallas is in trouble.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting situation, man. And I'm looking forward to seeing it front row because week 18, the Commanders visit Dallas. So I get to see potentially Dak Prescott, Mike McCarthy's last games in Dallas. I'm very interested to see what that's going to look like in early January of this season. And Wig, I know you got a sleeper for us too. And we have this conversation every year, it seems like. So let's have it right now early, and then we'll have it again later, I'm sure.
I know it's sacrilegious. I don't believe it, but it's not me. It's the hype, and it's what I've seen in the past. Mike Tomlin, they gave quarterbacks and you got a new offensive coordinator. If Mike Tomlin does 8-9 this year, you're going to start hearing those people chirping again because they are used to winning. And as much as folks believe that Mike is the type of person that'll make them run through a brick wall, and as much as you love him, at some point, everyone's message at some point seems to fade and get a little bit stale. And sometimes organizations feel they need a little bit of a reset. If with these two new quarterbacks, if things still remain stagnant and they lose the way that they've been losing with poor offensive play, I think Mike Tomlin might be in a little bit of trouble as well.
It's interesting, man, because every time Mike Tomlin's name comes up for that hot seat list, every fan base that needs a new head coach starts crying out for their team to hire Mike Tomlin. Yeah. And I've always kind of said this. If every other fan base is crying for their team to hire your guy, maybe you should reconsider what you're about to do. But you might also be right that maybe the message is getting just a little bit stale. Maybe they need to shake some things up and all this stuff. I remember not that long ago, Coach Harbaugh was rumored to be on the hot seat in Baltimore And now I don't think that's the case. And certainly they've done some other good things, but there's a case to be made for both sides, I suppose. But to me, I mean, when you look around the landscape in the National Football League, there are coaches that have not had near the success that Mike Tomlin has had during his time there. It never ceases to amaze me every year we have this conversation.
Yeah, I'd be shocked. But I can tell you this. I saw Andy Reid get fired. I saw Doug Peterson get fired after he won a Super Bowl 2 years earlier. And I saw Tony Dungy get fired in Tampa. Yeah. If that happens, I believe anybody can get canned.
That's true. That's true. In this business, there's very little to keep an owner from doing what they want to do if they feel strongly about it. And coaches aren't the only ones that can be victim to that. Also, quarterbacks. And there are some quarterbacks out there who may be taking their last snaps of the season for their teams as starters if they don't prove to their teams that they can be the future of their franchises. We'll go over that list coming up next on today's episode of Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Passion, drive, patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
Thanks again for making Locked On NFL your first listener, your first view today and every day. Everydayers, thanks for coming back. Thanks for coming through. Thanks for coming around the way that you do. Make sure you're also checking out Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you all of the biggest stories in sports. You'll get can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, all streaming again 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Wig, we just got done talking about coaches that are entering 2024 potentially on the hot seat already, or their seat could be getting a lot warmer as the season goes through, depending on how their teams produce. But there's also a list of quarterbacks. I think the list of quarterbacks is actually a little bit longer. Every year, it seems like in the NFL draft, there's a franchise quarterback coming out, or at least people think there's a franchise quarterback coming out, except for maybe the year that Kenny Pickett came out, which the Pittsburgh Steelers learned about the hard way, unfortunately for them. And this year is no different. There's going to be, I think there's already Carson Beck out of Georgia. There's going to be, Quinn Ewers out of Texas. There's going to be a couple, 2, 3, maybe 4. There's always a guy that right now we're not talking about that by the time the draft rolls around or the end of the college football season rolls around, everybody's talking about, like JJ McCarthy, for example. I know Michigan fans were high on him this time, 2023, but the nation wasn't as high. And then by the time we get to the end of the college football year, they're winning the championship and everybody's looking at him as a first round pick. So which veteran quarterbacks need to be on the lookout or need to be aware, at least, that if they don't produce in a way that makes their franchise believe you can lead us into the next 2, 3, 4 years, they might get replaced sooner rather than later. There's obviously some obvious candidates, right? Daniel Jones of the New York Giants. Some people think his goose is already cooked. It's just a matter of getting his contract out and being able to make the move. Aaron Rodgers, if for nothing else, health and age reasons. Russell Wilson has got to be on his last legs, right? He's got to show Pittsburgh what it is. Dak Prescott, we just talked about the Dallas Cowboys, and Derek Carr, New Orleans. That one of those quarterbacks that they tried to replace Drew Brees with that just hasn't worked out. But Wig, who's another quarterback that maybe isn't on the obvious list that you think could be on the quarterback hot seat this season?
Well, let me mention a couple of those college guys. Shedeur Sanders is going to raise a little bit of cane and make some noise, as well as Riley Leonard, because he's going to be going to Notre Dame, playing on a bigger stage in a bigger scenario and situation. So you got to watch out for all of them. It's going to shock some people, but I'm going to go with Kyler Murray. And it does not mean that I think that if he doesn't play well, he won't be the starter in 2025. But it does mean, in my opinion, if he doesn't play well in 2024, he enters the consciousness of the guy who's not the guy. And like you just said about Daniel Jones, they've made the decision and choice that he's going to be their starter in 2025. But we kind of already know, as you said, the goose is cooked. We know in the consciousness of the team, he's just a guy that's holding the spot until they can get somebody better. Kyler Murray has to play well this year. and be consistent. The defense, the team played really, really hard last year under the new coach. They overachieved. They had some games against people that they shouldn't have even been in the game. And sometimes they won them, and sometimes they were very, very hard out. So it seems like even though the record was what it was, they're trending upward. They also had a very, very good draft under Monty Ossenfort for the second year in a row. And now you have Marvin Harrison Jr. Everything is supposed to be improving. They play in a very, very tough division, though. If they can somehow crack the code and look the same, but now people start believing in Kyler and not just saying, okay, this is the first year with a new system, we got to figure it out. That stuff goes away after a while. Now they're going to expect Kyler Murray to start delivering on all those press clippings and be more than just a guy who can make exciting plays every now and then, be someone who can consistently do the things that you have to do in order to win. If they don't see that, it doesn't mean he can't play. It just means that they realize he's not him. And they are going to go out and find him, just like all teams eventually do in the National Football League. So if he ever enters their consciousness that he's not the guy, they're going to move on, I think, to somebody else.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think, it's always interesting when you talk about a quarterback that is moving on to another head coach or whatever it is, and you have a little bit of a injury history, you have a little bit of a work ethic, history and all these things. And yeah, I mean, if they can't get it going right and the coach believes and the GM believes, we just need this spark. We need this other guy who can really do this, or we just reset the salary cap a little bit with a rookie quarterback, go get some other players. Like there's a lot of reasons that these teams can do these kinds of things. And when you have a quarterback who still has some marketability, potentially still has some trade clout that you can go get some, regain some resources, it's very interesting. So it'll be interesting to see how the Cardinals compete in the NFC West. I'm actually staying in the NFC West. I'm going down to Los Angeles, and I'm looking at Matthew Stafford, and he's a veteran. He's older, so obviously those things come into play. But you also look at it, Wig, this is the last year on his contract that the Rams can't get out of without losing money. Next year, it's not the greatest cap savings in the world, okay? But the Los Angeles Rams can move on from Matt Stafford before 2025 or post June 1st, 2025, and save $3.5 million on their salary cap. Again, not a big savings, not a major savings, right? But the bottom line is you can change quarterbacks and you can actually save money while you do it. Matthew Stafford, it's another situation where I'm not sitting here saying Matthew Stafford is a bad quarterback or deserves to lose his job or any of these other things. But you've got a quarterback that's 36 years old. You have to be looking to the future. So if your options next year for the Los Angeles Rams, and if there are 2, 3, 4 quarterbacks potentially worth the first round pick, do you go get that fourth quarterback off the board, depending on where the Rams are picking? Keep Matt Stafford, and with him knowing you're now our bridge quarterback. You went from our savior, Super Bowl champion starter to now you're our bridge quarterback, and you went there in about a span of 4 years. That's how long it took you to go through those levels. Is Matt Stafford going to be willing to do that? Kirk Cousins wasn't willing to do that. So if Matt Stafford doesn't want to play that role, do you keep him in there and force him to do it at the expense of locker room chemistry? Or do you go ahead and move him? You're not going to be able to trade him. Nobody's going to take that $50 million on voluntarily. So you're going to have to release him, do all those things with the post-June 1st designation. But it'll be really interesting to see what happens with Matt Stafford, because he's kind of entering that crossroads where franchises have to decide, you know what I mean? Are we going to try to squeeze another championship out of you in your last 2 or 3 years? Or do we need to start building for the future? And I think when you look at the Rams, you look at that they're going up against the Niners, potentially the Cardinals, depending on what kind of noise they can make. The Seahawks got a young quarterback waiting in the wings as well. The Rams may have to decide to make a move next offseason.
They absolutely might have to decide to make a move, unless somebody who's a sleeper becomes available and the Rams can believe that they can save him too. And you know who that might be? How about our sleeper in Cleveland, Deshaun Watson, baby. Deshaun Watson. Now, his last game last year was the best game he's played since he's been in Cleveland, and one of the best games he's played in the last 4 years, right? The problem is he hasn't been available. And when he has been available, he hadn't been very good. And when he hasn't been available in some other times, it's because he liked massages and he probably did something he probably wasn't supposed to do or say, and he ended up on the suspended list, right? So that didn't stop him from getting his money. But sometimes teams, especially if they're not contending, they start to take a look and an eye towards, they do what they call football responsibility. They start looking ahead a little bit and say, we got to get out in front of this now. So once he enters the consciousness, and I keep bringing this up, it doesn't mean his days as a starter are over, especially when you're going to have to pay him whether he plays or not. But if he enters their consciousness as the guy who isn't the guy, And once they start taking that look towards the future, he's done and he doesn't even know it. And he's done without not being done on the field. But in their mind, he's done. And he has to totally try. You know, a good example we leaving out, you mentioned his name. Dak's making $59 million a year this year. Do we think he's going to be Dallas' quarterback in 2025? They're finished. They're done. So it doesn't mean he's going to lose his job immediately. It's just that in their mind, they already know we're finished. Because if Dak goes out and has an MVP season this year, it's going to cost them $65 million to keep him. And they ain't going to do that either. So, yeah, that's what I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Good sleeper there. I'm going to throw out one more sleeper real quick, and then we're going to run away from it. Will Levis of the Tennessee Titans. I think that there's a possibility there. His coach is not tied to him. You mentioned it before we start recording. He's not a first-round draft pick. And if he's convinced that my style of play doesn't fit his style of play, but there's a quarterback in the draft that does fit my style of play, hey, man, it wouldn't be – you talk about Josh Rosen going from Arizona going from Josh Rosen to Kyler Murray, it wouldn't even be the most shocking quarterback turnaround this decade. So Will Levis, I do believe, could be a quarterback that if he doesn't prove he can carry water for his new coach, maybe on his way out of that starting job sooner rather than later. We're going to talk about a young quarterback that most people don't expect to be worked out of his starting job, but injuries could cost him his starting job, just like it did in his rookie year, because you can't play if you can't be on the field. You can't start if you can't be on the field. Anthony Richardson injury concerns may be starting to creep up. We'll talk about that coming up next on today's episode of Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Final segment here on this Friday episode of Locked On NFL. Thanks again for making us your first listener, your first view today and every day. Everydayers, thanks for coming through. Wig, there's some new concerns, developments, whatever you want to call it, on the horizon with Anthony Richardson, Indianapolis Colts second-year quarterback, following a rookie season where he looked good in moments, he looked hurt in more moments, and he missed most of his rookie year because of those injuries, or because of that shoulder injury specifically. Wig, what's the latest on Anthony Richardson?
Well, let me say this. Anthony Richardson looked better as a pro than I thought he would. And I watched him a lot. As a matter of fact, his quarterback trainer, Denny Thompson, is a very, very close friend of mine. And so even though he's a Gator and I support the Seminoles, I still pull for the kid. I still pull for the young man. And he's a really, really good kid, right? He played better than I thought he was. They were able to really put things together, and he looked way better than he ever looked in college. The issue is availability. They say your best ability is your availability, and he has not been as available. And he has a shoulder injury. And he plays a physical form of football. And he's a big guy. And we just saw Cam Newton lead the league a little bit banged up on the bigger side with the athleticism. We're seeing today that guys that are that size, that are yoked like that, and he's 255 pounds without an ounce of fat on it.
Yeah.
Dante Culpepper, guys that are willing to engage with that little bit of punishment as they're headed towards the sideline or whatever. I'm starting to be a little bit concerned, not from someone who covers the Jaguars, because I don't care about that, but as someone who is looking at the league itself, and I'm saying, is he injury prone? Because there are a lot of players. I can say the same thing about Joe Burrow, but that's a little bit different. It's not, you start talking about shoulders of a guy that plays with a physical type and puts a lot of torque on the ball. He had these injuries in college as well. So he's never played a full season. Once he got the job, he's never played a full season. I am a little bit concerned. They do have to be cautious. He's got a shoulder injury now. He's in the mini camps, and they're rubbing his back and talking to him to the side and working his arms. And it's just never a good time when you see a young developmental quarterback who has missed time continue to miss time and continue to have to go slow and pace his reps because of those soft tissue type injuries. So that's a little bit of a concern for me, and it's something that we all need to monitor and keep our eye on.
Yeah, look at your quarterback. You know what I mean? And everybody says your team goes where your quarterback goes. And I'm a staunch believer that in the National Football League, if you're going to win, you need a killer quarterback or you need a killer defense. You need one of the two. There's certainly plenty of examples in history of Super Bowl teams that won off their defense. The Baltimore Ravens have done it. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers have done it. But then, most of your Super Bowl winners are winning with killer quarterbacks. Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, guys like that. The Indianapolis Colts, they don't have a killer defense, so they need to find a killer quarterback. They're hoping that Anthony Richardson is going to be that guy. He's certainly shown flashes of it in very small amount of time that he was able to play. Like you, I was very impressed by him. When I first heard that he was going to be a top 10 quarterback in his year's NFL draft, it was January. And I was surprised. Like, I was honestly surprised at that point in the evaluation. I just didn't see it personally. Not that I was really studying him too hard, because neither team that I was covering at the time was going to take him anyway, but just what I did know of him. But look, he's shown those scouts, that GM, those coaches, the ones who had faith in him, he's shown that they're right. But the problem is, like you mentioned, you could fill almost an entire other Hall of Fame with players who could have had great careers if their bodies agreed with their career decisions. That's the way I always put it, is sometimes your body does not agree with your career aspirations. I hope Anthony Richardson is not that guy, but it is concerning when you're a young quarterback coming off injury. You're coming off of injuries all throughout your college career, like you mentioned, and we're not even in the contact phase of training camp or of preseason yet, and you're already having to get treatment on the sideline. Yeah, there's reason to be concerned. You know what I mean? And like you, for the young man, I hope that it's abundance of caution more than anything from the Colts. But I think that you have to absolutely be concerned about it.
Especially with I'm usually not as overly concerned about some of those physical injuries when it's a guy like Burrow, when it's a guy like Brady, when it's a guy like Peyton Manning, that they're very cerebral. And I want to make this clear. I'm not making this a black and white issue, and I'm also not making this an issue about reading defenses. I'm making this an issue about somebody that plays with physicality and uses a lot of torque on their fastball. So we could be talking about Josh Allen also, if he's banged up with the way he plays the game. What I'm saying about Anthony Richardson is, if you're talking back and shoulders, even non-throwing shoulder, for a guy that ain't known for touch, he's known for spinning it. It's almost as if I'm saying that Greg Maddux has a better chance to recover from an arm or a back injury than Strasburg. And you're up there in the nation's capital, and you know that kid, Kerry Wood, they had everything. Strasburg and Kerry Wood, to use baseball analogies, they were fastball pitchers. Once they lose that, their game goes too. Greg Maddux, you can lose the fastball because he ain't dependent on it anyway, and he'll 88 you to death and paint the corner. So Richardson isn't a paint the corner guy. Richardson is a throw a strawberry through a locomotive guy. And if your body is not allowing you to do that, then he's not the guy that they drafted. And that's the issue that I have, that maybe sometimes those things, it happened to Cam Newton. It happened over a longer period of time, but he started to lose his physicality. And when he wasn't Cam Newton anymore, you taking Superman's cape off, basically. And I think that's the thing with Anthony Richardson. And the difference is he's getting hurt before he actually learns all the idiosyncrasies and nuances of the position. So that's what makes it dangerous for me. And the coaches have to really keep their eye on it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. So definitely a story to keep an eye on throughout the rest of the offseason, especially into training camp. Then obviously once the season gets started, everybody's gonna be looking at the health of their quarterbacks. That's gonna wrap it up for today's episode of Locked On NFL. Coming up on Monday, Kevin Ostreicher of Locked On Ravens will be back to talk about the biggest stories over the weekend on Locked On NFL. So make sure you're subscribed, turn on the notifications, auto downloads, whatever it is you need for your second listen. Check out Locked On Commanders, check out Locked On Jags, or stay right here and head on over to Locked On Sports Today if you are on YouTube. As always, thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day, every day, everydayers. Thanks for coming through like you do. For Tony Wiggins, I'm David Harrison. We will see you right back here next Friday for another episode of Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.